This is the Canon 400D. Welcome to Smart DSLR, the channel where we take a look at some smart choices you can make if you're looking into starting into photography, or if you're already into cameras and stuff and just want to try out something new and inexpensive. Now, just for a quick introduction to this camera, I bought it used for about 10 or 20 bucks, I think. There's a lot of these on the used market. Some people try to take a lot of money for them, and some people just basically give them away for free because they are pretty much worthless right now. Everyone used to have these 15 years, almost 20 years ago now, and so right now they are kind of just outdated cameras. But if you think about it, when everyone were purchasing these cameras back in the days, they were really good cameras. And they did take some amazing photos. So today we're gonna take a look at if this is still relevant for 2023 and for the coming year 2024. So let's just do a quick introduction of the specifications of this camera. This camera has a 10.1 megapixel sensor, and it's the successor of the Canon 350D. Maybe the most notable thing that this improves upon the 350D is the screen that is bigger. The screen is a 2.5-inch screen with 230,000 pixels, and it's this size. Let me just turn it on. So this is the screen size, and it's a pretty decent screen size. It's more than enough in my opinion. The camera also features a integrated vibration cleaning system to keep dust out of the sensor. It has a 9-point autofocus system with I'm pretty sure it's kind of that cross type sensor in the middle, which is basically the most usable focus point, and the other points are kind of working-ish. The ISO goes up to a maximum of 1600, even though I wouldn't recommend anyone using 1600 ISO on this camera. The 400D has an EF lens mount, which also accepts EFS lenses. The shutter speed goes up to 1/4000th of a second, and the camera can shoot 3 frames per second for a total of 27 frames in JPEG or 10 frames in RAW. Now, when talking about the specifications of this camera, this is kind of the most important thing of this camera as well, because it's so old and you might think that this camera is so outdated that you can't use it anymore. But let's go over some of the disadvantages of these old specs, or I would rather want to call it technical limitations. First thing is the viewfinder. The viewfinder isn't great. It's small, but at least it's optical, so what you're seeing is what you're getting. It's not a 100% coverage viewfinder, but it's kind of small and dim, and doesn't give you a good impression of what's in focus and what's not. So it works, but not more than that really. The buffer size, as I mentioned, only up to 10 frames in RAW, isn't really that much if you're doing much of a continuous shooting, so that sets some limitations on your shooting with this camera. The noise levels are pretty high. That can be a challenge if you're doing photography in low light conditions. But again, this is not the kind of camera that you want to drag out for low light shooting, and we'll get to that in a minute. This camera only accepts compact flash cards, which can be kind of annoyingly expensive if you're trying to find a card that has any decent size, and they're also kind of outdated. Other than that, it's not really a problem, but you might have a lot of SD cards laying around from old stuff, but not that many compact flash cards, I think. Now, the combination of a low buffer size, high noise, and a slow autofocus system makes this camera not ideal for sports photography. So if you're looking for a sports photography camera, you can just pretty much shut this video off and take a look at a used Canon 1D or something like that. This is not the camera for you. But if we try to just flip this around a bit and look at the technical limitations and see if we can extract some advantages out of this. One of the advantages of the kind of small file size of just 10.1 megapixel, or low pixel count should I say, is lower file sizes. Your files won't eat up much space on your computer, and if you are the kind of photographer that is looking at this camera, you're probably not in the market for something that has 50 megapixels, and you also probably can't afford lenses that can resolve up to that resolution anyways. So 10 megapixels is more than enough for absolutely most of the purposes that I can think about. You would be hard pressed to find any logical reason that you would want to have more than 10 megapixels when you're looking at a budget camera. The camera still shoots in RAW. That means you can still edit the pictures really well. You retain some information in blown out highlights, and you can manage the noise a little bit better than if you were just shooting in JPEG. So the Canon RAW is absolutely an advantage compared to, I don't know, cameras that don't shoot RAW, I guess. Perhaps the most important thing is that this camera doesn't have any BS features. It doesn't have any fancy eye tracking, face tracking, automatically optimizing your colors, and super fancy settings for anything that you can think of that just leads to decision paralysis, you know, analysis paralysis or whatever, that you're just spending more time figuring out the settings of the camera than actually shooting. Because this camera is so simple, you can still use auto modes, of course, but other than that, there just aren't that many settings to worry about, and that leads to more room for creativity and just actually shooting. Also, the screen, I would say, is good enough. If you go to some of the older cameras like the 350 or 300D or the classic Canon 1D and 1D Mark II, you'll find that the screens are really small and display very inaccurate colors. This screen is a little bit bigger. Of course, it doesn't display the most accurate of colors, but it gives you a more than good enough representation of what you just shot. So yeah, the screen is absolutely more than good enough. Don't have to worry about that. And for the last point, when it comes to kind of the technical advantages of this camera, is that this camera is still way better than what you are as a photographer. As long as you're not trying to use it for sports photography or something that it's absolutely not suited for. This camera will still perform better than what you can do, and a very good photographer with this camera can still make some very good images. So to kind of summarize this camera, we have to remember that a better camera will still not make you a better photographer, and buying the most expensive camera in the world will not lead to you taking more amazing pictures. The EF lenses for this camera and also the EFS lenses are getting cheaper every day, and that means that with this camera being basically free, you can spend pretty much all your money on good lenses, and good lenses will still perform excellent on this camera. One way you can think about it when looking at this camera is you can just think about it like a film camera, with the screen being, I would say, good enough, but disregarding the screen, you can just think of it like you're shooting and you just have to see what you get. There's no live view. I know I messed that up on the last review I did of a camera, but there is absolutely no live view on this camera, so it's hard to get super precise manual focus. So if you just treat it like a film camera and yeah, just take it from there, it can be an enjoyable experience. This camera kind of forces you to focus on the other aspects of photography and focus on lighting, composition, all the things that actually make up a good image, unlike focusing on having a expensive and good camera. One thing to note is that if you are like me, buying this camera to test it out with manual lenses, these fancy looking hipster lenses, you are just going to have to live with images that are completely out of focus. But if you just think of that as part of the art, then that really isn't a problem, I would say. Without live view, it's really hard to get proper focus with manual lenses, but you just have to shoot a lot and just kind of rack the focus as you're shooting, and the perfect image doesn't always have to have the perfect focus. Kind of unfocused images can be artistic, just like any other kind of artistic defect, like vignetting or weird shaped bokeh or other distortions. So just be aware of that. Now to close it out, if you decide to buy this camera, the most important thing is that you just get out and have fun with it and shoot some pictures and see what you can do, and stop looking at YouTube videos on what you're gonna buy to become a better photographer, because that's not gonna get you anywhere. But if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and if you really want to see some of my sample photos with this camera, there are not really much to look at in my opinion. Leave a comment and I'll see if I can make a video with that. And if you have any other suggestions on other cameras you would like me to review, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. Yeah, see you next time.